Good morning, fellow Plexers. This is a cold video. I haven't researched it. I'm going to try to help Will find out his issue from the Plex Pals Facebook support group. Let me bring Facebook in for a second. He says his media is named correctly, but he's getting titles like this when he scans it in. And the first suggestion by Nick was that he's using local assets. And I sent a or I think Nick sent a screenshot, and I just commented that Nick had a great answer to the question. So now Will says that that setting is not ticked in the advanced settings of his library. So all I know is he says his movies are named properly, and I want to give some examples of how a movie library should be set up, and also show him how to check for embedded metadata in an MKV or an MP4 file. So first of all, I'm at Plex's support article list, and where am I? I am at the Your Media section, and there's really 3 or 4 articles that concern movies that are important. So I'm going to right click and open that in a new tab, multiple editions in a new tab, multiple versions in a new tab, and I'm going to rearrange that so the editions come last, and local media assets in its own tab. So if we jump into this, proper naming is based on what Plex says in this article, and you can see some standard conventions. So you can pull the movie name from either TMDB or IMDb, and that would be the source ID section. So here's an example of using a source ID from IMDb or using a source ID from TMDB. That's my best suggestion to Will, is include that in the movie file name, and Plex should pull a match perfectly. So you simply copy the name of the movie and the year, just like it is at TMDB or IMDb, and that's your movie folder. You can put the source ID in the folder if you'd like. It helps. And then the movie file name is the exact same name you pulled from either database. And again, you can add the source ID this way. Now, there are formatting rules. The year has to be in parentheses. You do not replace a natural space with a period or an underscore. Those are scene release file names and not Plex compliant file names. There's a space between the year in parentheses and the source ID in curly braces. You don't replace a curly brace with a parentheses or a bracket. You don't replace a parentheses with a bracket or a curly brace. And then Plex has some other common things. Like you can add addition tags in also, which is a Plex Pass feature in this support article. So if we go back up, you'll see Plex's example is very simple. It shows how to name a subtitle, which is its own support article. Now, you can name for versioning, and a lot of people do this, and this is where Plex shows the official separator of a space dash space. So we have the proper movie name from IMDb or TMDB. It's used again in the file name, and then there's a space dash space to then place extra information like the resolution. So you can have 2 movies of different resolutions in the same movie folder, and this separator then allows you to notate the difference, and that difference could be anything you wanted. And then Plex will play the best option for the client device and the bandwidth the client device has to the server. So a phone on cellular data that's throttled will naturally play this one if everything goes right. Your Fire TV or Roku or Apple TV device or NVIDIA Shield at home with good local networking infrastructure and a good connection to the internet will play the better one, because that's the one that the client app will pick. So that's why versioning exists. Multiple editions is using the edition tag, which is a Plex Pass feature, to add this information into the scanning of the movie. Let's see if they have a display of that. Okay, so you see how director's cut is displayed here when the movie is displayed in Plex. It also shows up here, and it shows up after the year once it's scanned in. So these two movies with versioning will scan in as one poster, and then you can play each one individually, but Plex will just tell you the bit rate of each. The higher resolution probably has the higher bit rate, and it will also tell you the resolution, so you can choose that way. This scans it in as a separate item, and you can still have multiple versions of a movie in one movie folder, but this is a bad example. This should show the Blade Runner movie folder with both these editions in that. Plex isn't perfect. They don't get everything right, but you can read between the lines. And Local Media Assets is pulling embedded metadata primarily. So I'll show you an example of that in a second. So I'm logged into my Synology NAS through the file browser of my desktop Linux computer, but I want to go to Synology DSM because this is a better representation. And I'm going to show you a test media library to illustrate how I think structure should be. So a shared folder named Media PD, and then I have a sort folder for each library type. Movie-libraries, other-libraries, photo-libraries, TV-libraries. Now, it's not likely that someone will have more than one music library, so this is actually a library folder, or could be a library folder called music. If I expand this sort folder for only movie libraries, then you see actual library folders that you would point individual libraries at. This movie main, you'd point a main movie library at. You'd put kids movies in this folder and point a separate kids movie library at that. If you're using Plex for DVR, you can have a separate DVR folder for both movies and TV shows to have your recorded content go into its own library if you'd like. This is an example of a separate documentary library in Plex and the separate structure needed for it, and the same thing with a 4K library. So then inside these library folders are the actual Plex media folders. So each movie is in its own folder, named properly. Again, this is sourced from IMDb or TMDB. I use the TMDB source ID. If I use the IMDb source ID, I change this to IMD-TT, whatever the number is. And then inside the folder, you can have multiple versions. So this is an example of 3 versioning files and 1 addition tag file. So these top 3 will scan in as one movie poster that you can then choose to play based on resolution and bit rate. And any Plex user could do the same thing. This one scans in as a separate copy. So when I scan all this in, I'll have 2 posters. One with the edition tag of 4K, and then just one poster that has these 3 versions under it. So my own library structure is more simply named. I have a shared media folder called Plex. And notice everything's lowercase with no spaces until I get into the point of actually having the movie folder name or the TV show folder name or the artist folder name in a music library. Because I'm running Linux, and no matter what I do in the future, I'm going to be running Linux on some system, I'm keeping everything lowercase without spaces, including the shared media folder, the movie library sort folder that I happen to be using, my main movie library folder, and then I return to uppercase and spaces. But again, never ever replace a natural space with a period or an underscore. That's very important. Some things will scan that in that way and some won't. Okay, so my actual structure is similar. A very simply named shared media folder called Plex, and then sort folders named simply, like movie, music, photo, TV, and video for other video. If I pop into my TV show library, actually let's do it this way so you see it both ways. I have a couple different TV show libraries. I have my main one, I have a kids one, and then I have one in case I DVR from Plex, which I don't do very often. So then if I pop into the TV show library, now I have folder names that come from TVDB, because with a TV show, the source IDs and the relevant databases are either the movie database or the television database, TVDB, and I name from TVDB while adding the year because the year isn't always in the show folder name at TVDB. And then for a TV show, it's season 01, and then everything's named. It's the show name again with a year, space dash space again. That's the official separator. I could use a plain period here. So it could be 8 Simple Rules 2002 in parentheses, period, SO1, EO1, period again, pilot for the episode name. And then Plex's TV show scanner tells us to keep extra information in brackets. I actually do that with my movie media too, but it's not a rule yet for a Plex movie library. It is a rule and feature of a TV show library. So to me, this is proper naming. And let me use the same thing here. Let me go into this structure, into my TV show sort folder, into my TV show library folder. And we'll go into the same TV show, into season 1. And let me edit this. So all that's necessary is this much. That's all that Plex needs to scan the proper show into Plex. The episode name is optional. Plex doesn't use that for scanning, and Plex doesn't use any of this additional info for scanning. So none of that's needed, but I like descriptive file names, and this tells me that it's a 1080p Blu-ray rip. It's encoded with H.265. There's 2 channels instead of 6, which would be 5.1, and the audio is encoded with the AAC protocol. So those are very descriptive and yet compliant Plex names. So let's do this. Let's open up a word processor. It opened off screen. Let's paste this in and make it easy to read. So my file name is fine. It's compliant, just as this would be compliant. What's not compliant would be this. And I don't even know where the underscore is. So in too many cases, people say they named Plex's convention, and when you finally convince them to post a screenshot, they basically have a scene release file name. Now this isn't quite a scene release file name, but it's pretty close, and I flubbed that up. there would be a clue as to which scene released the file name in here, and it's just, this is an awful file name. So, Will, I really have to see your file names to know what's going on. Um, but let's go into the media. Let me find a movie, and I'll show you how the embedded metadata works. And you've got 1,400 titles. I think I'm approaching 7,000 titles in my movie library. And I don't know why. Whenever I run OBS Studio, certain things get slow, like accessing media on my Synology NAS. This usually opens up in a flash. And I don't know why. Okay, I'm in the kids movie library. All right, I'm looking for an MKV file. So if I right click and I open it up with MKV toolnix that I have installed, which opened off screen, we can look at embedded metadata. So MKV toolnix is really just something that lets you peek inside the media container file. So the actual video part always has an undetermined language because it's just video. This is an example of a movie that has extra audio tracks in it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 audio tracks in it, and this English one is set as the default track. This stuff is the embedded metadata. Not the fact that there's parts to the container file, it's how they're described inside the container. So here's an Italian audio track. The embedded metadata is knowing that this track is the Italian language versus the Portuguese versus the Spanish versus the English commentary track. So we've also got subtitles. So to have an embedded subtitle isn't quite the same as embedded metadata. The description of that subtitle that's embedded is the embedded metadata. Well, another important thing to look at is the output. Sometimes when you click on the output, you'll see the embedded file name that the media had, and lots of times it's a scene release file name, and using local media assets can pick that up and ignore your naming convention. But you said that switches off, so that's really shouldn't be the issue that's going on here. But I figured if I'm explaining things, I might as well try to explain them fully. So, like, this is probably something I should have just got rid of all the extra tracks and the extra subtitles, and then just double checked. This says it's the English hearing impaired, and it's not flagged as that. And actually, you don't need that there. I might just do this instead. And I can't save this on my Synology NAS. It won't save. But I could save it if it was locally, and I would have a new copy of this, and it would have a 1 after it, unless there was an embedded file name for the movie already that showed on the output, and then that would save as that. So if this was local, I would have saved a new copy that would have gotten rid of the extra audio tracks and the extra subtitle tracks. So what else can we look at with your Plex server to try to cover all the bases? Let me use the Plex Player app for Linux. I've got everything opening off screen. You can see I've got 2 people streaming off my server, but I'm going to go into my movie library and go to the 3 dots to manage library, to edit it, to go to the advanced settings. So double check to make sure you're using the latest Plex Movie Scanner and Plex Movie Agent. Now you have use local assets unchecked. You should also make sure that prefer local metadata is unchecked. And then really everything else is just based on your preferences. Now, I don't check this, and I use both embedded and external subtitles. I do set my minimum automatic collection size to 2, and that pulls from the collections that exist at TMDB. And that's about it. You can enable or disable credit detection, the voice activity, which is brand new. That helps to sync a subtitle that may not be perfectly synced with a movie. So really, it's just these two options you have to worry about. They should both be off. So I don't really know what to say besides to ask for examples of your file names. And I'm looking through your pictures here, your screenshots, and I don't see an example of any file name. But I strongly suspect that there's a scene release issue, a scene release naming issue going on, and you only believe that those folder and file names are Plex compliant. So what I really need to see is a screenshot that shows both the folder and the file name, and I'd like to see how they're organized. Like, are they in one movie library folder? And again, you don't need to use the sort folder idea that I use, but it's a nice organizational tactic, especially if you're going to have more than one movie library or more than one TV show library. Like in this example, this TV show sort folder contains a separate anime TV show library, a separate DVR, and a separate kids TV show library, and a separate main TV show library. Or let me rephrase that. It contains the structure to have those separate. Maybe with a small server, you start out with this separation planning for the future, but if you only have 40 TV shows, you might point one library at everything, but then as your collection grows to 500 TV shows, then maybe you'll branch off and have a separate main show library, separate kids TV show library, and a separate anime. So starting with good structure allows you that flexibility in the future. So Will, let me know. I'll get this on YouTube and out to you. Let me know how your folder and file names are how your folder and file names are formatted right now. Give me some examples of that with your problematic media, and I know we can find a solution, because there's always a solution. Thanks for watching, and happy Plexing.